So, hi, my name is Hannah Barazanzi, and I'm the leader of the Green Crew, which is a youth-led conservation organization that operates out of Bloomington, right on the Minnesota River. And I have the wonderful honor of moderating our three fabulous authors today. Jonathan Slott, did I say your name right? Slate? Slat. I practiced that, I promise. And he is a wildlife biologist and the author of Owls on the Eastern Ice. And you still work for the Wildlife Conservation Society? Yeah, Wildlife Conservation Society as the Northeast Asia Coordinator. So we're honored to have you here. Thank you for coming out. We have Heather Holm, who is a pollinator conservationist, educator, and author of Pollinators of Native Plants, Bees and Wasps, and a bunch of other great pollinator books. And we have Ashley Shelby, who's an environmental novelist and a former environmental crisis journalist.
I would have never thought of that term, but yeah, I guess it's always disasters, so.
Yes. So yeah, and you are the author of South Pole Station and Honeymoons in Temporary Locations, and which are some sci-fi books. So we're excited to have you all here today. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to get started with a question for Jonathan. Could you tell us a little bit about the first time? I know you seem to be an owl person. Would I be appropriate in saying that? Okay, so we would love to hear a little bit about the first time you saw a Blackstone's fish owl. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how you came to the decision to dedicate so much of your time working towards their restoration?
Okay, thanks. I could talk for a long time about that, so I'll try to be as concise as possible. So I first heard about this bird in, I would guess, 1995. Again, long story, but my family was in Russia. I saw this bird in a book. I was a fledgling bird watcher. I saw grainy black and white photographs of the species, and it was like this mythical creature, or like one of these things like you're never ever going to actually see in real life. And then years later, in the year 2000, I was in the Peace Corps in the Russian Far East, and kind of close to a village dump, I saw one of these birds. I didn't believe it was actually a Blackstone's fish owl at the time because they've become, again, so almost not real in my mind. And it turned out it was probably a young male and dispersing, looking for a mate. So in the middle of the day, he's out there sort of hooting, going from tree to tree and letting me kind of get close enough, get good looks at it. I had a 35 millimeter camera, so I took some photos. It was only after I got those photos developed weeks later that I was sure that it was a fish owl. And then later, when I was looking for a PhD project, I realized, I was looking, I'd done a master's with songbirds in the Russian birds, and I wanted to do a PhD that had real conservation impact. And I knew that fish owls were imperiled, and I hadn't seen that one in 2000, so by 2005, when I was researching a project, I would not have thought I could ever study these things, to catch them, because seeing one made it real, and that made it something that I could actually study.
Thank you. Okay. So then I was just gonna, I guess you could, Heather and Ashley both share a little bit about what got you into the path you're on, Ashley, especially with what prompted you to make the switch from more journalism to writing, more creative writing. And then Heather, I know you, so much of you've said that early education is kind of treats pollinators as pests. How did you make that switch from thinking of them in this way as pests to more of a turning point to break free from that and start using native plants in your garden? And could you guys talk a little bit about that as well, how you got into what you're doing now?
I think I'll pick up from what Michael was talking about. I think it was really something becoming eye-opening and interesting and novel, but also something that was hard to find. So I've kind of started with just falling down the insect rabbit hole while doing landscaping projects, ecological restoration, seeing the amazing diversity of insects that come to a native landscape versus a traditional garden. And I think that was my light bulb moment. I started to see these patterns of specific insects year after year coming back to the same plant. And it really, I said, I can't just watch this pattern happen over and over again before trying to understand why these insects are really preferentially visiting certain plants. And that really, I guess, is where I fell down the rabbit hole. When I went to college, entomology was really a discipline focused on integrative pest management and how to control insects. And conservation biology really wasn't a track at the time. So it's been a wonderful experience to have a career and that grows to learn about why the natural world is so important, and more specifically the important role of pollinating insects and plants. My one fun discovery, this new project I'm working on, is a website to illustrate all of the different bee species we have in Minnesota. And I have a number of species that are super rare and hard to find. And this summer I was able to find one, and it's a bee that is a specialist of certain pollens as well as oils that the flowers produce. And after 15 years of looking for this bee, I finally went to the right prairie at the right time, at the right day, the right weather, and was able to photograph this amazing bee doing her work, visiting some of our native loosestrife flowers. So I think it's all of those experiences just keep you wanting to get out of bed every morning, get outside, because in the pollinator world, there's always something to discover that's new every day.
I guess trying to pivot to journalism, I'm not sure about the transition here, but I am the daughter of a rather prominent local journalist, and being the oldest daughter, I wanted to be a journalist too. Turns out I'm an introvert, and journalism is very difficult for introverts. I gave it my best shot, so I worked as a journalist for several years, and my first book actually was Red River Rising, The Anatomy of a Flood and the Survival of an American City, which is about the flooding in Grand Forks, North Dakota. It's a bit of an immersion journalism technique, and I got through it. I white-knuckled my way through it, but I did find that interviewing people in distress was really difficult for me. You do have to have a certain ability to turn off, I don't want to say your humanity, but you have to turn something off and be a bit of a machine when you're asking someone difficult questions when they've just experienced a traumatic experience. However, one thing my father did teach me was that instead of being self-conscious, focus on the fact that they actually want to tell their story, they want to be heard. You know, people say, get that camera out of my face, that's a different story. But I did find, as a very young person writing this, I was 22, that interviewing people who had lost everything, and many people in Grand Forks had, was hugely instructive, both in terms of craft as a journalist, but also my empathy as a human being, and very, very humbling as well. So I was glad to be able to tell those folks' story. But the last work of journalism I did was an investigative piece for The Nation about ExxonMobil's decades-long attempt to avoid paying their punitive damage award to the fishers on Prince William Sound for the Delta spill. And I'm really proud of that piece, but it was a moment when I was like, I'm done, because I had the Exxon PR guy, Tom Sergliano, screaming at me on the other end of the phone, telling me I was, a fraud, and I'm trying to pin him, to the wall, and you're doing this, and you're not truthful, and I'm like, dude, I'm just trying to ask a question. I'm at my desk at work. I was working as an editor at Penguin, so I was freelancing. I'm at my desk at work, and I'm just asking questions. But I'm proud of that piece, but I knew that emotionally I couldn't sustain journalism for any longer. But I still wanted to tell stories, and fiction was where I pivoted to. And because all of my journalistic work was environmental, catastrophe crisis journalism, that was sort of where I focused my energies. So all of my fictional work really takes place at the intersection between humanity, extreme environments, and sometimes catastrophe as well.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I kind of wanted to, each of your books, or you have many books, so but one factor I've seen that's kind of common throughout all of them is talking a little bit about the relationship between nature or between creatures and people, and actually just a little more about like people between people after like a natural crisis. But I was hoping all of you could just talk a little bit about like how you've, what inspired you slash what have you been like, what have you tried to communicate when you're bringing this like talking about this connection between nature and people and like this kind of coexistence that we're striving for. I was just hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Okay, I'll start. First, I do want to add that I have a second book out, Beyond the Owl One, that's actually downstairs. It's not supposed to be out for a couple weeks, but the Thinking Spot, for some reason, got their box early. They're able to sell them. And so that book is about tigers. It's called Tigers Between Empires. And I think in both my owl book and the tiger book, I'm trying to show the value and necessity of collaboration. People from different backgrounds, from different countries, different politics, actually finding the one thing they have in common, which could be nature, could be more specific, could be owls, could be tigers, and kind of ignoring the noise and getting down to the work of actually making things happen. And it's in the owl book, it's very much in the tiger book. It's not just Americans and Russians in the tiger book, but it involves the Chinese. And I think there's a very short anecdote in the tiger book that I think is illustrative of this, where in the I'm gonna mess this up, let's say in the 1950s, it could be the 60s, it could be the 70s, where there was a border skirmish between Russia and the Soviet Union and China. There's this little island in the middle of the river. It was a border, it was a territorial conflict. Hundreds of people died. A museum in Beijing still has a Soviet tank from the skirmish. And just a few years ago, there's no way that there would ever be any cooperation there, right? You would think that a couple of decades ago. A few years ago, a protected area was created that kind of links tiger habitat on the Russia side with tiger habitat on the China side. Showing that they recognize the value of not just protecting tiger habitat on one side of the border, but trying to protect the whole. So that for me is what I try to convey in both my books.
Right?
Conceptually, to think about the human relationship with land and nature, I think we often think that the only way that we can conserve nature is if we put it aside and keep people out. And through my own ecological journey for the last 20 years, I spend a lot of my non-work time doing ecological restoration. And one of the main things that's really been reinforced for me in doing that work is that humans cannot be apart from nature. We actually need humans to be stewarding nature, to be part of that process in order to create high quality habitats for both our common and also our rare and endangered species. So I think we need to change what I kind of call that colonial paradigm of that it's this space somewhere else that we're setting aside. But our North American ecological history has always had some element of human stewardship with the land. And when we lose these relationships with the land, that's when we feel and act that we are not a part of nature.
That's very well said. That is something that I write about in my collection, Honeymoons and Temporary Locations, which is the climate fiction. And a thread that goes throughout that book is a term that probably people in this room are familiar with, called solastalgia. For those who don't know, it's a term coined by environmental philosopher Glenn Albrecht, Australian brilliant mind. And it's not a medical term, but it is a term that describes the unique emotional state we find ourselves in when the environment around us is degraded. And the best way I've ever heard it described was homesickness for a home that is not yet lost. And so I consider myself a solastalgic. And it sort of ties into what you're saying is that we're not separate from nature. We are nature. We don't, we try to control nature, but we don't. It's very interesting to see, it's terrifying to see as well, these sort of climate change magnified natural disasters occurring, and just, the best, laid plans of mice and men is like, well, we'll keep building on the Florida coast. It's like, well, no, you won't. I mean, you can keep rebuilding, but, I'm stronger than you. And so I think that idea of like working with nature, that seems like a given to me, and it is so hubristic of our leaders to think that we somehow have a way to control how this world responds to us and on our impacts. But what I am most interested in is the way that humans are responding. I'm interested in everyday people, everyday good, decent people who have backyards, who have parks that they love, have favorite trees that they see maybe being infested by pests that maybe weren't here 10, 20 years ago, and what feeling that evokes. So I'm the type of person who, when a tree is cut down, I feel it so deeply. And since publishing my short story collection, I realized I am so far from the only one who feels that way, that people can remember back in childhood trees that were cut down on, say, neighboring lots, and how that made them feel. So when I hear stories like that, it really is what gives me hope when we talk about where do you find hope in the climate change discussion. It's that recognition among, I would say, the vast majority of human beings, that we are part of nature, that we feel those things because there's a kinship there. And I think that it's so wonderful that the work that you do with these sort of misunderstood, insects and these, invisible owls, bringing them to the attention of people who care is what gives, stuff like that gives me hope.
It was beautifully said, thank you. Okay, I wanted to ask Jonathan, you have spent so much time with this species, also with your new book about tigers, the new species that are on the brink of extinction, kind of, and working towards rehabilitation and also just conserving environment. So I was wondering a little bit, this kind of leads in from what Ashley was talking about, but how do you stay hopeful and keep the passion alive around that while you're doing this work that's so hard and can feel disheartening at times?
I think it ties into some of the answers that my co-panelists gave. Is seeing people rediscover their connections with nature. In both fish owl habitat and tiger habitat, there's a lot of logging going on. And the primary logging company in the area is on board with reducing the impact of their work on tigers, on fish owls. And part of that is because the people who run the logging company they're basically locals. They live in the forest. They value going fishing and spending time on the coast and collecting mushrooms and berries from the forest. They want to keep doing that. They want their kids to keep doing that. They want their grandkids to be able to do that. And so, and there's a nature reserve in both the books it was a strict nature reserve in the Soviet Union and into Russia, where people were not allowed there. People like me, scientists were allowed, forest guards were allowed. That was kind of it. In the past 10, 15 years, those restrictions have loosened a little bit. So there are parts of the reserve where people who live in town next to it can go to before there's a sign that says you can't go here. These are natural resources not for you. And now they can go there, certain parts. And so they feel some kind of ownership, they feel some pride in a way that they didn't before, because it was being excluded before. And so once you're able to access something, you see it as yours, you're more willing to want to protect it and invest in it.
I don't have much to add, but I would agree with Jonathan that once people begin to make an investment in the land, in nature, and then it's this reciprocal relationship where your positive input yields positive outcomes. And when other people see that, it becomes eye-catching, but also it draws more enthusiasm and understanding for the purpose and goals of actually having positive interactions with the land.
For me, finding hope has been very important because the writing that I do about climate impact is taxing emotionally. One thing that has helped me, I'm gonna say two things. One is that remembering that the voices that are the loudest right now in our national discourse are not representative. They're just not. The vast majority of people care about their natural environments. They know climate change is real. They're overwhelmed because they feel that they have no agency. And they're also told that it's all their fault. And it's not. And I say this anytime I speak because I felt this way, constantly. Every time I drove my kids to soccer practice, oh, I'm complicit, I'm doing this to the world. That is what they want us to think. The truth is that it is a handful of corporations and individuals who are not only responsible for what we're living through right now, but who are the ones who are in the position to change it and don't. And so when we feel guilty, like we've done this, we're paralyzed, so we don't do anything. When that burden is lifted from us, we're more likely to be able to think of ways that we can change things from the inside out, or in smaller ways, like writing books or doing research and bringing people into natural spaces where they've once been excluded to create that connection. The other thing that helps me is getting outside and literally planting something, caring for something, watering something. And I know it sounds simple, but I finished my book, this recent book, and I was having mental health problems because I realized that the writing of that book was helping me process. And as soon as it was done, it didn't have that tool anymore, but yet the news was the same and everything was still coming in. I live on a property of about a little over 1.5 acres. And my dad and I spent all spring planting seedlings because the parcel had been overtaken by buckthorn, which is, I'm sure people here have dealt with buckthorn. But I found that using my hands and planting a helpless seedling and preparing the ground and watering it and visiting it every day and talking to it, I don't think in this room that makes me sound insane. Other people might think that. I thought, God, you know what? Nature is, by nature, optimistic and hopeful. And I am here with my hands, and instead of harming the world, I'm helping. Because that seedling doesn't get planted and it doesn't grow unless my hands put it in the ground in this situation. And so that's given me hope, getting outside every day and interacting with even the smallest of things. So seeing wasps, we have a lot of wasps, and watching what they do. I mean, in the books that my co-panelists here have written, I would imagine that would be a font of hope as well, because you're looking at on a granular level at creatures that they're just still existing. No matter what the conditions are, they aren't looking toward the future. They're existing in this moment, and I think that that can provide really necessary perspective for us in this moment.
I'm just going to add one thing since I have the mic again. I think one of the best things that come out of COVID was how many people started bird watching, frankly. All these people suddenly made this connection between nature that was never there. And now when they're walking down the street, they hear a cedar waxwing, right? They don't just hear a trill of a bird. And I think that's just the first baby steps in making these important connections that are fulfilling individually that also can lead to more local action of conservation.
Yeah, so this kind of transition from that into my next topic/question. So at Green Crew, which is the youth group that I'm part of with the Minnesota Valley chapter of the Isaac Walton League, we do a lot of hands-on work like Ashley and Heather were talking about, and also like those small baby steps. And one way we've gotten a lot of people involved is the Kuba Gallery, which is a art gallery that that is that we do a lot of like environmental photography in. And Heather, you've had work in the Koopa Gallery before. And so I was hoping to just ask a little bit about, you're known really well for your books on pollinators, but I was kind of wanting to hear a little bit about how you use photography as a way to as a form of storytelling that isn't, sometimes photography isn't thought of it in that way, but I think it really is a way for us to tell stories. I just kind of wanted to hear a little bit how you got into that as well as writing, and how you use that in conversation with your writing.
Yeah, photography's always been a lifelong passion for me. I actually wavered on going into biological sciences or doing a 4-year degree in photography. Worked in a darkroom when I was 14 and 15 in high school. So it's always been, I call it a secondary skill set that has been reincorporated into my professional work. I do all of my own photography for my books, but as far as the storytelling, I am trying to tell people about all these different pollinating insects of various sizes. So we have bees here in Minnesota that are quite literally the quarter the length of your baby fingernail. So they're super tiny, they're often overlooked, and through my photography I can really bring them to life, magnify them so that people can see their intricate details, their colors. But I'm not a video person yet, I guess I'm behind the times, but when I do try and talk about certain pollinating insects, I like to do a series of photos that really captures not only what the bee looks like, but where it nests, its behaviors, and all of these really amazing things that people are largely unaware of. And I just feel that it's just a wonderful tool to open people's eyes to the amazing diversity of different pollinating insects.
May I ask you a question? How do you marry the photography, the visual aspect of your work with the written word?
Sometimes it's writing the written word first and then doing the photography, or sometimes I'll take a photograph and realize, wow, this photograph is already telling its own story. So then I write about what's in the photograph. I'm kind of unconventional when I write my books. I generally do all the graphic layout myself, and for that reason, I will modify some of the information and stories within the books just based on the photography and what I've captured. Sometimes I get new ideas from my own pictures. Sometimes I have surprises where you'll photograph a certain insect, but then another insect happens to be in the photo that you didn't notice, and that becomes a whole new story. So,
What is the most surprising thing you ever found in a photo that you didn't see when you were taking it?
wow, okay. That's a great question.
Sorry, what was the question?
What's the most fascinating thing I found in a photo that I didn't realize while taking a photo? There are bees, some bees have a number of other kinds of bees called cuckoo bees that invade their nest and lay their eggs in the nest. And in some of the images, I'll be photographing a female bee collecting pollen on a specific plant, but the surprise is lurking in the background is one of these cuckoo bees, just kind of watching what the female's doing, because there's a common behavior. The cuckoo bees either have to find their host while they're out doing flower resource collection, or they find the host nest and wait around there. So I've had a lot of lurking cuckoo bees in the background pictures that I was so focused on the subject matter I didn't see them.
That would be a good title for a new book.
I know.
Lurking Cuckoo Bees.
Yeah, Jonathan, you mentioned earlier that one of those first moments with you with the fish owl was taking a photo. So do you want to kind of connect a little bit on that? Like, do you do photography as well as your writing? How do you build that into your writing?
Yeah, I take a lot of photos, and a lot of the descriptions in my book do come from photos. for my owl book, because I was conducting a PhD project at the time. I was taking pictures of everything. Every site I went to, a ton of photos, just so I would be able to remember what it was like. And then I used that in the book. And everything was well organized in folders for place and date. And so when I paired that with my field notes, so say April 12th, 2008, I went to Volko's cabin. I could go to my photo records, find that date, there's the cabin, and then I can just describe it as I'm walking for the first time. The most exciting, unexpected thing I found in a photo. It actually wasn't a photo, it was a video. But we were, with the owls, we were trying to catch owls. And we realized that males and females, they hunt in different spots. And we were trying to catch a female, we weren't trying to catch a male. So we could set up these little fish enclosures for both the male and the female. We wanted to keep the male away, so he wasn't coming in trying to steal fish and then get caught in the trap inadvertently. So we knew he was out of the picture. He was off downriver eating fish. So we had a camera on the female, waiting for her to kind of jump in and get caught. And suddenly there's this noise, and you can hear, like, she's getting, you can hear that there's another fish out flying in off screen, and she's making her hissing noises and getting ready for someone to come in. The male arrives. He flies in. You hear him like right off screen, and then he sort of hunches in. It's really an ogre-like walk with prey in his beak. So this was right before the breeding season. It was in the breeding season, and so he is trying to show her that he's a good mate. He can provide for her. He can bring food, and so it was great. He gave her something. It was all kind of off screen. You could see shadows, but you couldn't really see him, and you couldn't see her take whatever it was from him. And so for a long time, I just assumed that was fish, right? Because he had a box of them. He had 15 fish, 100 meters downriver. And then looking at the shadows, we realized it was actually a rodent. And so he could have brought her any fish. He went out of his way to get something hard to catch, to show her what a good hunter is. So I thought that was pretty cool. And it took multiple viewings before I actually saw that it wasn't a fish.
That's super cool. Okay,
Like a chocolate dip strawberry.
we get an Eddie with the strawberries, but he shows the chocolate.
Yeah.
That's really like it. Okay, I just had a quick question for Ashley, which was, you've made a point of making all of your like science fiction writing very much based in science and very scientifically accurate. So I just wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about how you do that. I just think it's so cool. So I just wanted to kind of like how you build that in and how you use that to convey your story, kind of.
Sure. I probably should say for anybody who's a true science fiction fan here, I'm not really a science fiction writer. You'd be very disappointed. I have a lot of science fiction writer friends, and they're wonderful, and they're so open to like the weirdest stuff. I wrote a story for this collection about it was a retelling of Benito Cereno by Herman Melville, and it includes talking polar bears. And my sci-fi friends were like, this isn't sci-fi, but I am so in, like, tell me more about the talking polar bears, where, I worked in traditional publishing in New York as an editor, and I'm telling you right now, they would have been like, talking polar bears, bye, go over to sci-fi or fantasy. So they're very generous, but the bristles would come up if they're like, actually, what is a sci-fi writer? Cli-fi is, that's a whole other conference topic, whether that's, a term that is legit or not, but science is very important to me. I wished I had been able to be a scientist. I just didn't have that mind. And I admire scientists so much. I, just short of worship. But because I can't practice science, at least that was not my skill set, I wanted to figure out another way to explore it. And I have the luxury as a fiction writer of choosing certain small mosaic pieces of science and spending a lot of time on them so that even I can understand it. And if I understand it as the author, then I can create a character who is a specialist in that. And so long as the dialogue is pretty, contained, I can make that realistic, and that was always my goal. So South Pole Station, my first novel, obviously set at the research base at 90 South, had a lot of scientist characters, including an astrophysicist. And so I got to spend 4 years, studying very small slices of, theories on, the beginnings of the universe. That was his specialty, and got to a point where I was able to write a character who was convincingly an astrophysicist. My goal has always been that if an astrophysicist read that book, they would not be pulled out of the text because of some error, or it would sound believable. Or if I was to write, conservation biologist character, that like if, someone like you, that if I was writing fiction about it, you wouldn't be like, okay, I can't suspend disbelief anymore because you got that wrong. For me, it's easier because I just have a smaller canvas, and so I can spend more time going pretty deep. But at the same time, it takes a long period of time for me to know it well enough, know that small segment well enough to make it seem seamless in a work of fiction. And it can be a delicate dance because you don't want to seem discursive at all in the text. You don't want a character lecturing. That is easy to do, and well, I did do it in all my early drafts. And I'm like, okay, boring. This is boring. No one wants to hear this. So one of the things I like to do most is have lay people interacting with scientists, and scientists sort of trying to explain things, and then lay people asking really challenging questions. The South Pole Station is set in the early 2000s, right in the middle of the initial climate denial stuff. And there's a climate scientist down there, and there's a climate denialist down there as well. And this cook who works in the kitchen says, I don't want climate change to be true. I don't want it to be a thing that's happening. The climate denialist said, well, it's not. It's all hoax. And the climate scientists say, well, it's not a hoax. We actually do that research here, and I can show you. And I just thought that's a really interesting conversation, because I don't want climate change to be true either. You can imagine why it would be more attractive to the person who says it's not happening. So I get to play with a lot of those things in terms of the conversation between, the culture, society, and scientists. And, like I said, it all comes from an admiration of scientists and science.
Okay, I want to make sure we have time for some Q&A. So, so do we want to move into Q&A now? Do people have questions that they want answered?
I've got one. So it came up, the theme of the separation that we perceive of us in nature. This phrase, are we, apart from nature, or are we a part of nature? And I guess it's sort of two-part. What role do you think our culture or socialization plays in that versus, our culture is specific to other cultures? And if that's what has led to this narrative, this story being predominant, how do we change that narrative? And if it is culturally driven like that, and it is sort of based in our collective story, how do we begin to change that large story? I know, simple question.
That's a multifaceted question. So I'm going to talk maybe just from my own personal experience and perspective. I think many of us are from a Christian background, and that is a religion that has taught dominance over nature. But now I see a lot of inspiration from places of worship that they are now talking about taking care of God's creation. So there's been a real societal shift away from that dominance of humans over nature to this responsibility to be caring for nature and to be part of nature. I think we are in a political period as well where we have a lot of push and pull between different individual interests. We have people who are fighting or advocating for a community-based way of living, a community-based approach to things. And then we have people on the other end of the spectrum that are interested in serving themselves and not maybe perhaps fully aware of how their actions impact the rest of the community. And that's the case for everybody. So I'm trying to, I guess, from a personal level, being someone who really cares about nature and about the natural world, is to try and understand the people that it's not on their radar whatsoever, and how can we connect with those people and meet them where they are, to basically bring them into the fold, to really feel inspired by what you get from being part of nature rather than being apart from it.
I think a recognition that any consumer culture, any consumption-based economic system, especially capitalism on steroids, has a vested interest in making you think that we're not part of nature because it consumes nature. I find that just recognition of that alone can be really helpful, because once you see that, you kind of get outside of the box that we're in. It feels very empowering, and then you kind of want to share that message, find other people who feel that way, tell people who don't realize that, that that's the state of the situation, and also realizing, and this is going to sound very facile, but that the United States is not the world. So I went to Amsterdam a few years ago, and just in a state of just, the world's going to hell, climate-wise, nothing we can do is going to change anything. Living in this, Minnesota, we're a little bit, spoiled, because we do actually address some things, but just speaking nationally, we're not doing anything. You get to Amsterdam, and it's just a different story. They are aggressive about adaptive technologies. They're aggressive about, addressing like mitigation stuff as well, but also preventative stuff. It's top of mind, just culturally. And in that moment, as naive as I was at my advanced age, I just said to myself, oh my God, the world is not the United States. And the world is moving, they're moving on. They are addressing this. We're not. They are. And so that gave me some hope to say, like, hey, you know what? I have to remember every time I feel like it all is lost. That I feel that way because we're being made to feel that way in this country. And doomerism is a whole other conference topic, because they want us to feel that way. Just having that perspective is a way to change the conversation. And then I would also say platforming scientists and coming to events like this. The fact that you're here is how we change the message. And maybe the next time you come to a conference like this, you bring 5 people with you, and then they're changed. So conversations, finding like-minded people, talking to people who are willing, who have an open mind, maybe aren't where you are yet, but are willing to talk, and then listening to scientists. That would be my answer.
That's a good answer. So I think most of my experiences that I write about is not U.S. culture, so I'm going to answer this through the Russian and Chinese cultures. And I'm going to give an example from the Tiger book, and I hope it makes sense, because I go all the way back to the 1850s here. Amur tigers they're also called Siberian tigers, but there are no tigers in Siberia. They live in the Amur River Basin, and this was once all Chinese territory. And then by 1860, the border, Russia-China border, was formed by the Amur, and it basically cut tiger habitat in half, Amur tiger habitat, which is why the book is Tigers Between Empires. And then the fates of these tigers really varied depending on which side of the border they happened to live on. Right when the border was created, the Chinese sent a bunch of settlers into the area to kind of firm up the border. The Russians did the same on the north on their side, and on the Russian side, it was all these hunters coming in. The European mindset of it's a big thing, let's shoot it and have pelts on our walls and in houses like this. But they were still doing okay on the Chinese side, because it was mostly peasants who were moving into tiger habitat. And by the 1940s, the Russians had started to set up nature reserves. They realized that they were going to be 20 or 30 tigers total in Russia. So they enacted these laws to first prevent hunting, then to prevent capture of cubs for zoos and circuses. And so in around 1940, tiger numbers start to slowly go up in Russia. Meanwhile, on the China side, you've got there's revolution, there's a cultural revolution where tigers are seen as pests, as vermin. So their numbers are crashing as they're going up slowly in Russia. And so by the 1980s, it was the opposite picture. We had several hundred in Russia, and you had 30 in China. And so we're up to a couple, maybe 500 in Russia now. And in the 1990s, the Chinese government started to actually start to care about their lands with protected areas. And both countries are very top-down, so once the top says something, people kind of do it. A colleague who's in the book did some surveys in the late 1990s and found maybe a dozen tigers left in China. Now, there's like 80. So balance is being restored. Like, the tigers are coming back. It's patchy, but they're coming back to their entire range. And it's culture, but it's also driven very much by politics and how the whims, I guess, of the governing bodies. And I think what to do about it, I echo what Ashley and Heather said, and it's also come up a few times. It's just the, I guess, enlightenment of the people. Nature is really big in China now. There's like that middle class, that upper middle class. They're bird watching. They're buying really nice cameras to go out and take pictures of things. They want to keep doing that, and so they're advocating for conservation in a way that they weren't even 10, 15 years ago. And I find that's inspiring, and that gives us hope. And it's also not here, right? Like we have our own issues, but the world is moving on without us, and that's a good thing.
So that kind of wraps us up with our panel. Thank you guys so much for your time. And thank you all for coming out.